Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's study. We're going to continue looking at 1 Samuel chapter 20. I actually think we're going to read some spirit prophecy from patriarchs and prophets. But anyway, before we do that, let's have a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so grateful, Lord, for this day, the time that we can have together in studying and in looking into the things that angels desire to look into. And we are thankful, Lord, for the work that you do upon our hearts and in our lives, the miracles that you perform every day in giving us life and the light that comes to us through your word. We just ask, Lord, that your Holy Spirit can lead and guide in this study, that we can receive the things that you want us to receive, and that we can have a blessing that can be shared with others. So be with us now, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so we actually had been reading from patriarchs and prophets. So we're doing a review of chapters that we had gone through already, looking at these various lines that each of these chapters create. Now, chapter 20 is when David is really going to begin fleeing from Saul, and it's the one where we have this new moon feast. And we've taken the position that whether rightly or wrongly, but I haven't been able to confirm that anyone else has come to the same conclusion as we have. The general impression that people have is that every new moon the Jews had a feast. But it seems to me that there's no evidence for that it is purely an assumption, and that it really doesn't make sense that every month you're going to celebrate the beginning of the month with a 2-day feast. Now, maybe it is reasonable, but it is definitely likely that the first day of the first month would be much more important than any other month, because that's when the religious calendar begins. So that's the position that I've taken, which I think is logical. But there isn't evidence for it. But there isn't evidence that they celebrated the new moon every month. Now, some people look at later rabbinic writings, writings that are hundreds of years after the time of Christ, for all kinds of evidence of different traditions that, again, are just basically speculative on the part of the rabbis. Some of these traditions contradict each other. There isn't, I don't put a lot of reliability upon what the rabbis say about, how the calendar worked and so forth. And a part of that is because a lot of the discussion that occurs regarding the calendar, besides just being contradictory, is also partisan. That is, there are different groups that were competing in various ways, and those types of things still exist. You'll find Messianic Jews, and you'll find lunar Sabbatarians and different types of Messianic Christians and so forth, that have all different kinds of theories about how the calendar works, and they have all kinds of different arguments. So yeah, what I've used is the Bible as a primary source, and sometimes reason. Reason is a God-given gift. Some things that people say seem unreasonable, but just because I use reason in the Bible doesn't mean I'm always right. There's lots of times I'm not. But I think that this is a pretty reasonable conclusion, that this is the beginning of the year. Even if they did celebrate the new moon in some way, this seems to be a more special occasion. And so we say, since it's the first day of the first month, what does that symbolize in our movement? What's the significance of the first day of the first month? Let's put the question that way. There's lots of significance. What are some things that make the first day of the first month significant?
April 19th, 1844, we know as the first disappointment, although March 21st was, right? It's not as well known.
Well, March 21st, yeah. So April 19th, 1844 is what we would call the first disappointment. There were actually lots of other first disappointments. What would be the first disappointment in Millerite history? The first time they're disappointed? Anybody know? So many Adventists were disappointed January 1st, 1843. Now, why would they be disappointed January 1st, 1843?
Well, they knew, or they surmised that Christ was going to return in that year, so maybe they figured it's 1843. The Lord is coming now on the
Yeah.
1st of January. I don't know. I probably read it, but I've forgotten it.
Yeah. So it was, because there wasn't the communication system that we have today regarding, how things were happening. Some people would hear about the year 1843, Jesus is coming back, and they'd expect Jesus to come back right at the beginning of 1843. So January 1st comes, he's not back. Some people became discouraged. I mean, it wasn't a huge disappointment. Some would just say, oh, well, I guess, he's not coming back yet, maybe near the end of the year. Now, in December of 1842, so remember, they made the 1843 chart in May of 1842. And at the time they made that chart, the year 1843, they had not yet discerned that there had been no 0 year between 1 BC and 180, right? So they hadn't done any adjustments. And so the year 1843, also, they had not used the biblical year. So they were using January 1st, 1843 to December 31st, 1843 initially. Now, in December of 1842, William Miller says that the Jewish year 1843 is going to be the time that would be marked. So he's going to mark that from the spring equinox, March 21st, 1843 to March 21st, 1844. He didn't really understand how the Jewish calendar works. He was just simply using the equinox itself. And that's why they had March 21st, 1844. Now, it does so happen that the Jews, both the Rabbinic and the Karaite Jews in 1844, March 21st was the first day of the first month. That is, that they didn't they didn't do the proper biblical calendar. They just, the Jews had adopted a calculated calendar, and they could have Passover much earlier in their calendar. But anyway, in the year 1844, the rabbis and the Karaites had March 21st, 1844. But Miller didn't really understand that when he said that in 1842. He didn't know that the Jewish year, according to the rabbis, would end on, March 30th would be the last day of that year. So anyway, we can say it has to do with the first disappointment. Now, we know, of course, the first day of the first month, its initial importance is that they're going to, for the first time, begin to count the months, to number the months from the spring, and that's going to occur at the time of the Exodus. So when he says that this month is going to be to you the beginning of months, that is, the year is going to begin, the Jews now begin to call the months like the first month, the second month, the third month. The Babylonians, who have a solar lunar calendar similar to the Jews, they never number the months. The months are always named, so they don't call it like the first month or the seventh month. Though they do have a spring festival that sort of parallels the spring festival of the Jews. It's called the Kittu festival. And they also have a fall festival in the seventh month, which is also called the Kittu festival. I'm not sure what the word Kittu means, but it might mean something like festival. But they have one in the spring in the first month, and they have one in the seventh month. It's kind of aligned with Passover and Day of Atonement. But they never number the months. They never say, it's in the seventh month. They just say, the feast in the month Nisanu, right, which is the first month for the Jews, Nisan. Originally Aviv or Abib, and then Tishritu in the fall for the Babylonians, and Tishri for the Jews. So the Jews actually eventually adopted the names of the months that the Babylonians had. So there's lots of little calendar things. So we got the first day of the first month. It's the beginning of the year. We know Ezra leaves Babylon on the first day of the first month in Ezra 7, and Ezra 10 closes with that divorcement that ends on the first day of the first month. So that year, 457 BC, that starts the 2300 days, begins on the date. The date is going to actually be April 26th is going to be the first day of the first month on the Julian calendar in 457 BC. And then it's going to be a 354-day year. So it's going to end at like April 15th or something like that in 456 BC. So it ends on the first day of the first month, whichever date that is. I think it's April 15th or 16th. Now, we aligned the first day of the first month, at least the first time I know that Jeff had drawn a line. Well, here, I'll draw it here. I'll bring it up here in a sec. I have lots of calendars that have the first day of the first month. We should do this some other way. Okay, so this is probably the best one to show. I mean, we're all really familiar with this, at least we should be. You know, the first disappointment, April 19th, 1844. And I have there Ezekiel as well. So Ezekiel, the first day of the first month is in Ezekiel 29. Let me see, 29:17 and first day of the first month. So what is that there? I'm just trying to figure out what I did there. Anyway, forget about that for now. So this line here where we have the first disappointment being the first day of the first month, and midnight, Dwight's birthday, July 21st, being the fifth day of the fourth month, August 15th being the first day of the fifth month, and October 22nd being the 10th day of the seventh month. So we know if the 10th day of the seventh month is October 22nd, then the first day of the first month is April 19th. And Ellen White talks about the midnight cry being given midway between the time they were first disappointed and the great disappointment. And so when she talks about midnight, the midnight cry being given in the very words, "Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him," she's not talking about Exeter, because Exeter is not midway. July 21st is, where Samuel Snow's at Boston. And that's where he rides up on the horse. Below that, I have Ezekiel's dates. So Ezekiel has these dates. I think he has the first day of the first month in Ezekiel 29:17, and he has April 19th in Ezekiel 30:20. And if you look at the date that's in that verse, it's going to be April 19th. He begins prophesying on the fifth day of the fourth month, which is July 21st in 592 BC. Also, July 21st is in Boston, right? So you can see those line up. And then the first day of the fifth month is the midnight cry, August 15th. And that date shows up in Ezekiel 4:6 and in Ezekiel 26:1-2. That is, he begins lying on his right side on August 15th and in 591 BC. And since he began prophesying, and there's going to be 390 days, it's going to be 390 days between those dates. And then Ezekiel, the last dated vision, like in Ezekiel 40, verse 1, that's going to be the 10th day of the seventh month, and it's also October 22nd in 573 BC. But anyway, so we got these first day of the first months. We have Ezra. So let me see, I got lots of these Ezra ones, so that's not the way I want to go. I go back this way. Probably should just show you this line. Yes, so is this the one I want? No, I've got lots of these charts, but none of these are the ones I want. Okay, we'll leave that for now. So we got this first day of the first month, so it's pretty important. And we line it up with 9/11, which is the thing I wanted to show, but I didn't have that. So I was looking for the chart that says we have 9/11, as the first day of the first month. So it's the arrival of the second angel's message. So Jeff in 2016 had 9/11, midnight cry, Sunday law for those waymarks, first day of the first month, fifth day of the fourth month, first day of the fifth month, and 10th day of the seventh month. So when we see this in this story in 1 Samuel 20, and we constructed a line from it, we said that the primary symbol that we need to observe here are the ones that relate to this being the first day of the first month, that it refers to 9/11. Now, we have taken the position that the second angel arrives in our line on November 9th, 2019. Now, Jeff says that the second angel arrives at 9/11. Now, when he does that, he's correct, right? So how can the second angel arrive at 9/11 and also November 9th, 2019? What are we doing when we have the second angel arrive on two different dates? Just to remind people. So when we do that, what are we doing? Does the second angel arrive at 9/11?
Yes.
Okay, so that's correct. Does the second angel arrive on November 9th, 2019?
On a different line, yes.
Yeah, on a different line, right? So
Yes.
So we need to recognize that we have different lines. Now, the line where it arrives at 9/11 is which line? What's the primary line where 9/11 is the arrival of the second angel, where it joins the third angel? What line would we call that? Would that be Ellen White's line?
Repeat that, please.
So the line where the angel arrives at 9/11, the second angel arrives, the mighty angel of Revelation 18, comes and joins the third angel.
Right.
That would be Ellen White's line, right?
Correct.
Okay. And this is something that was not understood in the movement. We were having really a hard time understanding these lines. And this chapter 20, and the first time we really started to understand this was when we were studying Judges, but we didn't really grasp it until we got kind of near the end of Judges. But we started to say, oh, this makes sense now. And we're just slow of understanding, right? That's all it is. We're not really very smart. So it took us a while to figure out something that really we should have been able to figure out a lot sooner. But it's so logical. It's just kind of, we missed it, that we have different lines. And Jeff was doing this without recognizing it. And the way that people characterized what he was doing is they felt he was moving the waymarks. Now, in Millerite history, do they move the waymarks as they move through that history? That is, do they think something's the first day of the first month that isn't the first day of the first month, and later come to recognize that something else is the first day of the first month, right? You understand? That they do the same thing that Jeff did. You know, they're first looking for January 1st, 1843, and then they're going to say, well, no, March 21st, 1843, and then March, then they're going to move it to the fall of 1843, and then Jesus is going to come back in the spring of 1844, March 21st, and then April 19th, right? Now, they don't wait till March 21st. They never actually wait till those days are passed before they make the next prediction. As they move through that history, they start to refine their understanding of the lines. Does that make sense? Can we see that they were refining their understanding of the lines? They wouldn't have understood it that way. They wouldn't have, or at least expressed it that way. When did they first mark the close of probation? When was probation going to close? You guys should know this.
August 11th, 1840.
Yeah, so originally they had August 11th, 1840, that probation was going to close then, or at least sometime shortly after that, because they saw that at the end of the sixth trumpet, which would be, in their view, would just end with the end of the second woe, that they would then have the seventh trumpet begin to sound. and the seventh trumpet would be marking the close of probation. And they actually marked that with Rosh Hashanah. That's why in 1844, they believed that probation had closed on October 13th, on the first day of the seventh month, because that's how they understood that's like the seventh trumpet sounding, closing probation is the way they looked at it. So we can see in Millerite history, as they move through history, they continue to refine their understanding of the end of the prophetic periods. And we're in a similar situation as we try to refine our understanding of the lines. So this point here about the first day of the first month is we have Saul, right? So Saul is having this feast. So think about this as being Jeff or FFA, right? So if this is the first day of the first month, what is this feast that Saul expects David to be at that David is not going to be at? Does that make sense as a question?
I don't know that it does make sense as a question.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm being a little bit abstract and not really I'm trying to get you to think about this. So in this story, we know that this has to do with this persecution of David by Saul. And there's going to be this test that David and Jonathan are going to place in front of Saul, right? So we need to understand this in the context of our history, that this is, and remember that this is a repeat and enlarge. When we drew out the line of 1 Samuel chapter 20, I mean, it reached back to 9/11/2001, all the way up to December 30th, 2023. So we're not taking that when we take these lines and we go through these different chapters, that they're all just following one another in the sense of, one ends and then we have a new chronology. We know that these lines are repeat and enlarge of our history, showing different details. And so in this one, we're going to have David, who represents the leadership of Christ, in connection with July 18th, Jonathan, that represents the biblical chronology that has made a covenant with July 18th. And again, they're going to renew a covenant here. We have the symbol of the first day of the first month, this new moon, and it's going to be a feast at the time of the new moon, a meal celebrating the new moon, the beginning of the year. And there's going to be 2 days, or we could even kind of say 3 days, connected with this story. We have Saul representing FFA and the leadership of FFA. So sometimes Jeff, but in this case, it would be Jeff and FFA. And it's going to represent this whole period of time that there's some test being put forward to see if Saul is going to kill David. And David believes that Saul is going to want to kill him. And Jonathan's saying, well, he would tell me if he was going to do that. I should know everything that he's planning. So they do this test about the new moon feast. So that must have something to do with our understanding of September 11th and November 9th. Does that make sense?
It should.
Okay. Yeah. So I've just tried to frame the story a little bit differently than sometimes I get so bogged down in the details of the chronology and things that I find if I kind of step back and look at the story, I can get a perspective of it that really helps us understand all of the different symbols that are here. So we can see that the new moon, being this understanding of 9/11, is going to be used by David and Jonathan to determine Saul's intentions, right? Now, what does it mean to sit down at meat with the king? What would that symbolize? Right? David said unto Jonathan, verse 5, behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat. but let me go that I may hide myself in the field unto the third day at even. So what does it mean to sit with the king at meat, symbolically?
Well, to show him respect as your host and your sovereign, and to accept his words. And we can't do that with Jeff right now. I mean, accept some
Yeah.
of them, of course.
Okay, now if you're going to sit down, if Jeff is actually asking us now, that we need to sit down and meet with him, right? That is, he is the one providing the food, the spiritual food, and if we don't, partake of this food, then we've rejected the message. He's not going to have fellowship with us. Does that kind of make sense? That it has to do with the understanding or study.
That's
Right.
logical.
Now, the other thing that we had in this verse 5, we had the doubling of the word sit. Now, we had other places where we had doublings of words, but in this one, we're going to have sit is doubled, and sit is 3427. And what did 3427 represent?
Well, it would be the week of Christ.
Yeah, so it had to do with the week of Christ. Now Dwight had made a list of all of these doublings in 1 Samuel chapter 20, right? So I'm trying to see if I can find the right one. Yeah, so these doublings were important as well. So if we the doublings represent what?
Second angel's message.
Yeah, the second angel's message. So this isn't the right chart because you had one where you didn't really recognize the 3427. You just, I don't know, you inverted them. You just saw them as the same word, right? Something I do all the time. Okay, this is the correct one here. So there we go. So the other one had the 2734, but it didn't have Yeshab. Okay, so in 1 Samuel chapter 20, the word yada was doubled, and it was doubled in two different verses, in verse 3 and verse 9, which means to know. Yeshab, that's the 3427. Now, remember, we can go left to right or right to left with the week of Christ. And we also have chara, which is 2734, and that's doubled in verse 7. And 3427 is doubled in verse 5, right? 6485 is doubled. Pakad, that's the one that means that's in verse 6. That's the word that is miss. If thy father at all miss me. So that one's doubled, right? So we got verse 5, 6, and 7. It has most of the doublings. Verse 9, verse 3, verse 28 also has this word demand, as well as in verse 6 that's doubled sha'al, right? So we found these pretty interesting, that we had all of these doublings in this chapter. And if we take it as the second angel's message, it makes sense that the second angel's message is going to be represented by these doublings. Right, so the arrival of the second angel, so 9/11. So the primary understanding of 1 Samuel 20 has to do with, in this movement, it's about the understanding of 9/11 and its connection to 11:9. And this is the one thing that Jeff does not understand. Doesn't really understand. He actually ignores November 9th, 2019 altogether. From what I understand, he doesn't consider it anything. Now, he still holds on to July 18th as the first disappointment, which makes no sense if it is a false date. So I'm not quite sure the logic involved there. So those are things, that we had gone through. I'm not going to go through everything in detail again, but we have all of these doublings. And then we had put these different symbols that we had from the different numbers. They gave us different spans of time. So for instance, in 2734, that word, which means to become angry, I had added it to the word Yom, day 3117. And I got 5,851 days. And I counted from 9/11, that number of days. And it brought me to September 18th, 1 week after the 16th anniversary of 9/11. So here I'll go to this chart here. So this is the line that we drew. And, as we review this, we may find that there's things that we didn't understand correctly or fully, or things that we just missed. But that's one of the things that we had done, is we had looked at these two words in Hebrew. So I should actually have this as H. So that's the word Yom, and this 2734, which is, which verse was that in? That was in verse 7. Okay. And if you say, thus it is well, thy servant shall have peace, but if he be very wroth, be sure that evil is determined by him. Oh yeah, how did I do that? So, I remember. So we had done something. See, I forget so many things that I do. I probably forget more than I've ever known, if that makes any sense. So 2734, there was something about that word as far as the Hebrew number. I don't know if anybody can remind me if they remember. There was something that we had done. So we know it represents the week of Christ. I don't remember exactly. What did I do? There was some verse that I looked at. It'll come back to me. Maybe there's something I wrote down that will remind me of it. Okay, so anyway, we added those two together. We got 5,851 days. That was 16 years and 1 week, and that was significant. And then we had some other ones, H2416. I should write better notes. So this, we added two words together. Yeah, so this had to do with the phrase. Okay, what's the other one? The other number, 4194. Because it had to do with life and death. So, okay, so the one word means life, 2416, and 4194 means death. And that's going to be, mot. So, there it is. So in verse 3, and David sware, moreover, that is, he swore seven times, and said, thy father certainly knoweth, that one's doubled, that I have found grace in thine eyes. And he saith, let not Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved, but truly as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, there is but a step between me and death. So when we add this word liveth, 2416, and the word death, 4194, we get 6,610 days. And that brings us 23 days before November 9th, 2019. That is 6,633 days is the number of days between 9/11 and November 9th. The interesting thing about this is halfway. If we have those 23 days, you can see the two periods of 23 days, because from September 24th, 2019, which is this number H6587. So I believe that's the word. 6587, which word is that? See how much information there is. 65. Oh, the step. There's a step between life and death. That's it. So we can see at the bottom one, 6610, that's the between me and death. So we just kind of have between life and death. We had those together. And then we have that word step, 6587 is 18 years and 13 days. So the significance there for me, and that if we added the Hebrew word yom to that, we get the word for field, 7704. But the 6587 is the main, so it's 18 years and 13 days. Now, the significance of that, again, because we had that 16 years and 7 days. And now we have 18 years and 13 days. Now we know there's 13 days in both the 20th and the 21st century between the Julian and the Gregorian dates. September 24th, 2019 is September 11th, 2019 Julian. Okay, Angela has a comment there. See John 7, verse 1 to 3 and verse 8, 1 Samuel 2. Okay, so John 7 is about Christ's actions at the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, can you explain, Angela, what this
I
significant?
just see the parallel because what came to me was I go not up. Well, listen, I cannot go back to Jewry because the Jews sought to kill me. And I said, well, where is that? And I found it. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he would not walk in Jewry because the Jews sought to kill him. And the second verse says, now the Jews' feast of tabernacles was at hand. 3, his brethren therefore said unto him, depart hence and go into Judea, that thy disciples also may see the works that thou doest. And then in verse 8, Christ says, go ye up unto this feast. I go not up yet unto this feast, for my time is not yet come.
Okay, can you explain that a bit further? Just there's a
Well,
feast.
there was a feast there, and the Jews it was a special feast, and I guess the males were all supposed to attend. But Christ knew that if he attended, he was very likely to be slaughtered before his time, so he desisted until it was his time to appear.
Yeah, now we know that Dwight did an in-depth study about that Feast of Tabernacles and its connection to the woman caught in the act of adultery. I don't remember all the details of it, but I know that we had counted that period of time, that year. Do you remember, Dwight, the significance of that since you did that study?
We did. The study was that this woman had been brought before Christ at the time of the Feast of Tabernacles, just before the crucifixion.
Mm-hmm.
We looked at the days that it would have been between then and the crucifixion itself.
And that was, what, 187 days?
I believe so.
That's what I remember. So it's that, and you can understand the connection why that would be. So first, we're going to have a leap year at the end of that year.
Right.
So the year that Jesus is crucified, there's actually a 13th month before that first month begins. Normally, there's 178 days between the autumn. Well, there's 178 days from the autumnal equinox to the spring equinox, and there's 187 from the spring equinox to the fall equinox, which makes 365 days, right? 178 plus 187. So this would have, because of that leap month, it ends up working out with the end of the Feast of Tabernacles. It wouldn't in a regular year without that leap month in there. So anyway, that's kind of an interesting connection. So what I'm saying is that we can connect, the spring and the fall feasts because of that connection, if that makes sense. I know people who watch these videos sometimes have no idea what we're talking about. But so anyway, the point that we have here is we have, because that was kind of, Angela was just directing us to that. But if we think about the first day of the first month, we think about this cycle of time, right? These years, and these 18 years and 13 days, if we get back to that. We know from September 24th, 2019, there's 46 days to November 9th, 2019. And there's 23 days from 9/11, 2019 to November 9th, 2019. So that 46 days being divided into these two periods of 23 days becomes significant. Okay, so we got 16 years and 1 week. At the end of that, you have 390 days to October 13th, 2018. We just note that number of days between that presentation that I did at the School of Prophets in 2018 that we were directed to through that date, September 18th, 2017, that 16 years and 1 week. And then we have, two periods, well, one period of 390 days, and then from October 13th, 2018 to November 9th, 2019 is 391 and a half days, right? So you can kind of see that from that September 18th date to November 9th, 2019, there's a period. We could actually say it's two periods of 391 and a half days or something like that. I think how's that work? Yeah. Because the number of days, I actually put these all on a chart. So if I go from, so it's two periods of 391 days. So I go from, I'll show you this, what I did. So I put all these dates that we have on this line, I put them into a chart, just so you can easily see them. And you can see so we have that span of time from September 11th, which is right here, 6,574 days, or pardon me, it's here, 6,587 days. So that's that span that's given from the word 6587, right? And 6587 was the word step. So that's a step, right? That step from 9/11 brings us to September 24th, which is, if we put it as a Julian date, so you're just going to go here, you can see that is actually September 11th, 2019 Julian, right? Just go back, Julian Gregorian. And then you can see this is what we got. Here we have 390 days to October 13th again. And then from October 13th, you can see there's 392 days to November 9th, 2019. But obviously I could take that half a day or that 1 day off, right? So this would be like 390 and a half, and this would be 391 and a half, depends where I count. Or I could just count it as two periods of 391 days, right? If I started at the end of October 13th. Does that make sense? So the total period from this September 18th date to November 9th is just 782, which is 391 divided by 2, or 391 times 2 is 782. Does that kind of help a little bit to visualize that? Or does it not make sense? So we have these different spans of time based upon what this story is telling us. Oh, now I remember the other thing. So when we looked at the second day, so he's going to have this expression. So let's go here, back to the Bible. Let me go back. I don't want to look at John now. So it's going to be so we have this span of time, 8,145 days. So 8,145 is the number of days from 9/11 to December 30th, 2023. Okay, so that's when Jeff is going to speak. And the Hebrew number 8145 is the word second. And it occurs in verse 27 and 24, or 34, pardon me, I meant. So in verse 27, we have this word second. It came to pass on the morrow, which was the second day of the month, right? Now, and this is kind of interesting too, because we can tell that we had the first day of the month was the day before that, right? So that day in which Saul, okay, let's look at it. Let's go back at this story. So we have Saul at this this table, right? So they make this agreement about shooting these arrows. So we'll just leave that for now. So the king sat upon his seat as at other times, even a seat by the wall, and Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, and David's place was empty. So verse 25. Nevertheless, Saul spake not anything that day, for he thought something had befallen him. He is not clean, surely he is not clean. Now it came to pass on the morrow, which was the second day of the month, right? So if tomorrow is the second day of the month, the day before was which day of the month?
Be the first day.
So if they know that the day was the first day of the month, why are they having another feast on the second day of the month? You understand what I'm asking? So when do they determine when the month begins?
Was it the sighting of the new moon?
Yeah. At what time of day do they sight this new moon?
It's the 29th.
That's what I'd like to know.
Well, it's going to be at evening. Now, what they would normally do when you get to the 29th of the month at evening, you know that the month can only have 29 or 30 days. So at evening time, like this morning when I went for my walk, I could see the new moon, because you can see the new moon in the morning. Or would it be the new moon? It'd be the old new moon. It would be, yeah. Because I think right now I'm trying to think, is waning or waxing? I always get that confused. I have to think about it. So right now the moon is waning.
Yeah.
Right? Is that correct?
Okay.
Right. Because normally if you see the moon in the morning, yeah, so the moon would be, yeah, so it must have been, yeah, the moon would be, we would be waning. So, yeah, so the moon's waning. That makes sense. I was right. So we're going to have the new moon in about 4 days, like the astronomical new moon. So right now, probably we're like, must be like on the calendar converter, we would be, today would be like maybe the 24th or something of, yeah, the 24th of Tammuz, right? So anyway, I could see the old moon, right? I guess not the new moon. We got the old moon, and then we're going to have the new moon in, a week, right? 6 days or something like that. So if you're going to look for the new moon, you look for it at evening. So at evening on the 29th, you would go out, and if you see the new moon, then the next day is the first day of the first month, or that evening is starting the first day of the next month, right? Okay, you don't have to go out the next day at all. Why don't I need to go out on the 30th to see if I see the new moon? Why do I only need to go out on the 29th?
Well, it must be when you'd first see it.
Okay, so since the month can only have 29 or 30 days, if I don't see the new moon on the 29th, I know the next day is the 30th, and the day after that is the 1st. I don't even have to bother looking for the new moon on the 30th. Does that make sense? So with their little bone.
So in other words, on the 29th at evening, if you see the new moon, you got one more day, which would be 30. But if you look for it on the 30th and you don't
if you see the new moon on the 29th, the next day is the 1st.
The 1st, right?
Right? If you don't see it, the next day is the 30th.
Okay.
And you don't need to go see it on the 30th because there can't be 31 days. Even if you didn't see the new moon on the 29th and you said, well, the next day is the 30th, and then if you went out to look at the new moon on the 30th and you didn't see the new moon because it was cloudy or something, well, you wouldn't say, okay, now the next day is the 31st, because there is no 31st day of a month. It can only be 30 days. So the next day after the 30th is always going to be the 1st. But after the 29th, you could have a 30th day, or you could have the 1st day. So only on the 29th do you need to look for the new moon, right? That's just how it would work. But we don't do this nowadays, so we don't think about it. Now, some people believe that even if like some messianic Christian groups and stuff, they think you actually have to sight the new moon. So they think the month could have 31 days, if no new moon was sighted because it was cloudy. But that never happened, right? So they always had 29 or 30 days because they knew, that the average month is 29 and a half days. So they're not going to have a 31-day month because then, it would really mess up their calendar. They have like a 28th month, right? So you just have to go out on the 29th is the point. Now here then, that means when they had their feast the first day, they already knew that it was the first day of the month because they would have seen the new moon the evening before. So one thing I would say is that it probably was on the 29th. So they would plan 2 days for the feast, right? Because you don't necessarily know which day you're going to see the new moon on. But since they saw the new moon the evening before the feast, then that day was going to be the first day of the month. And then the second day of the feast is going to be the second day of the month in this case. Now,
we talking about the Passover feast in
no. This is just the feast starting the beginning of the year. This is just this is the new moon feast, right? So they're going to have a feast, and they set aside 2 days for it because prior to the feast, you don't know if the first day of the feast is going to be the first day of the month. Sometimes the second day of the feast would be the first day of the month, depending on when the new moon was sighted. So they set aside 2 days for this feast at the beginning of the year to determine, when the year is going to begin. So in this case, that means on the 29th, the new moon was sighted because they don't have 3 days of the feast. They set aside 2 days for the feast. And since the second day of the feast is going to be the second day of the month, that means the first day of the feast in this case was the first day of the month. But sometimes when they have this 2-day feast, the first day of the month is going to end up being the second day of the feast because it wasn't sighted the evening before the first day of the feast. Does that make sense to people? They set aside 2 days. They don't know which of those 2 days ahead of time is going to be the first day of the month. They just know one of those is going to be. In this case, the first day of the feast ended up being the first day of the month. The second day of the feast ended up being the second day of the month. But it's not always that way. Because the timing of the feast is determined ahead of time. That is, you're going to have the feast on either it's going to start either on the 30th of day of the 12th month, or the 13th month if it's a leap year, or it'll end up being the first day of the first month. You just don't know ahead of time. I mean, they could probably guess, but the point is this is going to be the second day of the month, and it's also the second day of the feast. Okay, so that's in verse 27. Now the word second is also going to show up in verse 34, right? So I took the fact that this word second, as in second day, so in verse 27, it's actually going to be the second day. And in verse 34, we're just going to say second of the month. This one's going to say second day of the month. So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger and did eat no meat the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David because his father had done him shame. So on the second day, that's when the javelin's going to be thrown at Jonathan. Okay. Is that making sense to people? Like, I know it takes a little bit to wrap our minds around this, but we got this feast that's going to be 2 days. It's set up ahead of time. It's going to mark the beginning of the year. Jonathan and David set up this test to see how Saul will respond if David isn't at this feast. Saul seems okay the first day, which is going to be the first day of the month, first day of the year. And then the second day of the month, when David's not there, Saul gets upset and he throws this spear at Jonathan, right? Because in verse 32, and Jonathan answered Saul, his father, and said unto him, wherefore shall he be slain? What hath he done? And Saul cast a javelin at him to smite him, whereby Jonathan knew that it was determined of his father to slay David. So Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and did eat no meat the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David because his father had done him shame. So the fact that the word second shows up in verse 27 and 34, that was the significance that we had. So that word second day is going to be a span of time, that is the word second, in verse 27 and 34.
I got a question, Theodore.
Okay.
Can I ask you?
Yeah, of course.
This is the first day of the year, right? So
that's the position we're taking. It's going to be the first day of the first month, where they're going to have.
that's the first day of the year, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then the 14th day of the year is when Passover starts, right?
Yeah.
All right. I'm just asking.
Yeah. So the
Could it not
14th.
be that it could be, you have stated before that the first 6 months, once the new moon was determined at the beginning of the year, they don't count. They don't look for, it's just like 30, 29, 30, 29.
Yeah, for the first 6 months.
Yeah. Could
That
it
means
not then,
month.
could it not then be a month then beyond that, between the 7th and the 12th month?
So the question is, maybe they would observe a new moon feast like at the beginning of the 8th month or something.
Yes.
Okay. And the possibility of that, so the logic behind that would be, since you have this cycle of months, so we know how long the first month is. It's always going to be 30 days. The second will always be 29. The third will always be 30. The fourth will be 29. The fifth will be 30. The sixth will be 29. But the seventh month is not determined, right, ahead of time, because it's not part of the religious feast, the religious cycle. So this would be, the earliest that they could then again look for a new moon would be the 8th month. And the logic there might be, well, we've kept this cycle of 30 and 29, and, we're not quite sure when this is going to happen again. The problem I have with that is you don't really care as much about what day of the month it is as we do nowadays. That is, I would think that, what day of the month it is, if it's for non-religious reasons, for just secular civil reasons, but nobody really cares, right? It's just kind of by consensus. Who cares if you got the wrong day of the month?
Well, you
Right.
would have chronologists there, I'm sure he would care.
Well, I'm just saying the average person wouldn't care.
Probably.
And there seems to be a lot of sloppiness like even in the Elephantine Papyri, which is a much later period, where they mark these days of the month, and in contracts, right? And they're going to double date some of these. Well, one thing is quite clear: is some of the dating is done fairly sloppily. That is, people didn't have calendars. Right? They don't have a calendar on the wall. The only kind of calendar that we know they had was the bone calendar, just a little, piece of bone with 30 holes in it, 3 rows of 10 holes, where they'd stick a peg in the holes to mark the days of the month. So I don't think that people would really care, what day of the month it is. For the average person, they don't have computers, they don't, if they're signing a contract, whatever day of the month they agree that it is, that's sufficient, especially in this earlier period, right? So that, but for the religious year, it is important that we know which day it is. So when God makes, Nisan or Aviv, as it's called then, the beginning of months, and they're going to start numbering the months. That's why, the idea that it's then a fixed cycle of 30 and 29 days, because you can determine ahead of time, in a sense, it's a calculated calendar. Once you know the first day of the month, then you know the whole dates for all of the religious feasts. And it makes sense that you're going to want to have the Day of Atonement always the same number of days from the first day of the first month. That is the 187th day of the year. Angela, you had a
No,
comment?
I'm just thinking out loud as I'm going through my e-sword here.
Okay.
Because what I was going to post was for second, 8 times 1 times 4 times 5 is 160, and I said there are 160 days between July 18th, 20 and December 25th, 20. So I'm wondering what this 160 days, like what else does it stand for? Is it of any importance?
Hmm.
That's another factor we could consider later, I guess.
So the 160 days between which?
July 18th and December 25th, 20.
Okay, so from July 18th on.
I was just focusing on second, and I just timed it like 8, 1, 4, 5.
Yeah, okay, I don't know. Anyway, Stephen, does that kind of make sense, the logic behind why I think it's just going to be the first day of the year that they would really be concerned about the month? Stephen, you there? Maybe he went away from the computer for a second.
Oh, thanks, Iran. 5 months, 10 days. Okay, maybe that's just reminding us.
Yeah, 5 prophetic
10th day
months.
of
Yeah, so the 10th day of the 5th month symbol could be. Okay. Yeah, so anyway, that's the logic that I have regarding why I think that they only are really concerned about the start of the year and other months don't matter. And you can kind of see that it wouldn't matter. Like in our society, we're so particular about time, what day it is, what date, exactly what time it is. Those things all become really important in sort of the modern world, but the religious world and the world of the past, the ancient world, because they observed the sky was their calendar, it was their clock. It was just sort of evident to everyone. But when it comes to the religious calendar, then that has to be determined for religious reasons, right? You can't have different people having a different day for the Passover, for instance, or the Day of Atonement. So that's going to be determined at the start of the year. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe every single month they're going to have a 2-day feast like this, but I don't think it really makes sense. I don't think there would be that much focus upon what day of the month it is, especially on non-religious months. So in understanding these different spans, so that second day, the fact that it is in verse 24 and 27 allowed me to add the Hebrew number 2734 to the word for day 3117 to get the 5851 days from 9/11 to September 18th, 2017. That was sort of the rationale there. Then life and death, adding those two together to be 23 days short of that other span. And then we have the third day. Now that goes from 9/11, so that's the Hebrew number 7992, and that is the span of time to July 29th, 30th, depending whether you count inclusive or cardinal. And that's when Jeff is going to begin speaking. So if we go to the 30th, or not begin speaking, begin writing, publishing, and then 134 days or 154 days later, he's going to speak publicly on December 30th. So what this chart gave us was this connection between 9/11 and December 30th, 2023. And the significance of this then has to do with Saul. So we got Saul on the first day of the year. He's not going to say anything, but then he's going to say something on the second day, and he's going to throw the javelin at Jonathan. So when is that second day? When is it that Saul makes his intentions known? When does he throw the javelin at Jonathan? Would that be December 30th, 2023? Or we just say, from July 29th to December 30th, 2023? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So we can take this whole story and there's a lot more to the story than what we looked at, but we can see the general gist of the story. David is fearful that Saul is seeking to kill him. Jonathan's not so sure about it. They have this test. The test is over the calendar, in a sense, the first day of the first month, chronology, and whether David should flee or not is going to be dependent upon Saul's reaction. So exactly where we would place this, if we're going to say the first day of the first month, represents 9/11 or 11/9, that connection between those two dates, the second angel arriving. And then the second day, which is also the third day, we know that whether we're counting inclusively or not, the second day of the month is really kind of the third day, I think, is how we looked at. Where's the third day? That was in verse. That was in 20 verse 5.
Yes, and again, the 18th verse talks about it too. Now I've got another question, which sounds really ignorant, but somebody will enlighten me. I was going to chat. Did Samuel Snow have his testimony given in writing, right? December 30th or 31st? Was it in 1843 or 1844? Or maybe it wasn't either of those years, because I just don't remember.
Okay, ask your question again. I didn't catch it.
Okay, did Samuel Snow have his testimony given or published December 30th or 31st? And was it in 1843 or 1844? Or was it in 1842? I don't know.
So December 31st, 1843, he gave his testimony at the Boston Tabernacle.
Okay, thank you.
It's not going to be published until February, I think. It's in, you'll find his testimony is in the Three Angels Messages source book.
Okay, that's where I need to look.
Yeah, so it's in there, and it has the publishing date. It's going to be published in the Signs of the Times, but he's going to give his testimony on New Year's Eve, right? The next day, January
31st.
Yeah, so January 1st, 1844 is like the next day he decides that he's going to tell people that Jesus is coming back in the fall and not in the spring, right? So, and then he's going to write on February 16th, he's going to have his first letter that he gives to Brother Southard, who's the editor of the Midnight Cry periodical, right? And it's going to be published there on then February 22nd. But yeah, so there's all of this chronology dealing with that. Okay. Yeah, and so the third day is also going to be in verse 12. So in verse 5, so we just finish this off here before we close with prayer. David said unto Jonathan, behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat, but let me go that I may hide myself in the field unto the third day at even. Right? So, and then in verse 12, and Jonathan said unto David, O Lord God of Israel, when I have sounded my father about tomorrow, anytime, or the third day. So the third day is the third day from the day before the yesterday. If that makes any sense, right? Because they got today, tomorrow, the third day. So when he's talking about the third day, that's actually going to be the second day of the month. Does that make sense? It's just a bit confusing. So when we have this second day, which goes to December 30th, 2023, the third day goes to July 29th, 2023, the numbers. But we can see this, the third day and the second day are really the same day. But it's interesting that both of those point us to Jeff publishing and Jeff speaking. So hopefully this kind of brings us back into focus about this chapter.
So
And
the the 29th, he's talking to Jonathan on the 29th, right?
Yes. So to them, it would be the 29th because they don't know yet which day is going to be the first day of the first month.
So he's just counting the 29th and he's going to the second.
Well, he's just saying today's the first day because when you talk about the third day,
Right.
third day is going to end up being the second day of the month. But the third day could have ended up being the first day of the month if there had been 30 days in that month. But that month only had 29 days.
Okay.
Month before the first day of the month. Because they wouldn't set up the feast any other way. Like if they're going to have this 2 days of the feast planned ahead of time, you're going to plan them for what's going to be the 30th day of the last day of the year, the last day of the year and the first day of the year, or it's going to be the first 2 days of the year, right? You wouldn't plan it any other way. Yeah, so this is the 29th that he's talking because the next days they're going to have the feast. So at that night at sunset, they're going to know, okay, that's the first day of the month, but they wouldn't have known that until sunset on the 29th. Yeah, it's quite interesting when we start to look at these types of details that, most people just never, ever think about. Like, I don't know how many people in the world think about this stuff in the detail that we do when it comes to chronology and calendars and stuff. I don't find it even in a lot of, papers and stuff on calendars. They don't really seem to think these things through in detail. They just have a lot of assumptions, which don't really make sense. Okay, so any final comments before we close with prayer? Is it good? Okay. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you, Lord, for this day, for this study, and we just pray that you can help us to process all of this information, to keep it in our memories, and that we can continue to contemplate your word. Guide and direct our steps today. May your angels watch over each one of us and our families and all of our contacts with others. Thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.